April of 2026. Missiles cross the sky of the Middle East, bridges collapse in Iran, columns of smoke cover Tehran, and the President of the United States threatens to return an entire civilization to the Stone Age. More than 2,000 people have already died. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil passes, is closed. And in the midst of all this, a question that does not leave the minds of millions of Christians around the planet. Could the Bible have described exactly this scenario more than 2,500 years ago? Think about what is happening at this exact moment. On the 7th day of April of 2026, Donald Trump gave an ultimatum to Iran. Either the Tehran regime reopened the Strait of Hormuz by 8 at night, Washington time, or the United States would destroy bridges, power plants, and all Iranian civilian infrastructure. The words of the American president were brutal. He said that an entire civilization could die that night, that Iran would be sent back to the Stone Age, that there would be no return. Meanwhile, Israel bombed railways, petrochemical refineries, and Iranian military bases on its own, in a joint offensive that had already lasted more than 5 weeks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israeli forces were crushing the regime, and Iranian civilians, in a desperate act, formed human chains around power plants to try to protect with their own bodies what the missiles were about to destroy. Measure the scale of this. Ordinary people holding hands surrounding an electrical plant, knowing that a missile could fall at any moment. The president of Iran said publicly that he was willing to die along with millions of Iranians to defend his country. On the other side, Trump repeated that the deadline was final. No negotiation, no extension, no mercy. The price of oil skyrocketed to $117 a barrel. Countries like Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia activated air defense systems against Iranian missiles. The bridge connecting Saudi Arabia to Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet of the American Navy is located, was temporarily closed. The entire world held its breath. And then, almost at the limit of the deadline, came the ceasefire. 2 weeks of truce. Pakistan mediated the negotiation. Iran agreed to partially reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump suspended the threat of mass destruction. Oil fell 8% in minutes. Stock exchanges skyrocketed. But no one was deceived. That was not peace, it was a pause. A pause in a war that has already killed more than 2,076 people in little more than 5 weeks, which closed the most important maritime passage on the planet and placed the Middle East on the brink of total collapse. Now, why does this matter to those who read the Bible? Because the territory that today is called Iran has another name in the scriptures, a name that appears dozens of times in the prophetic books. Persia, and the history of Persia with Israel is one of the most complex, most paradoxical, and most revealing in the entire biblical text, because the same nation that one day saved the people of God is the same nation that, according to the prophets, will march against them in the last days. Go back in time for a moment. 539 years before Christ, the Babylonian Empire, which had destroyed Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple, and taken the Jews into captivity, falls into the hands of Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. And what does Cyrus do? Something that no conqueror of antiquity would do. He frees the Jews. He authorizes their return to the land of Israel. He finances the reconstruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. And God, through the prophet Isaiah, calls Cyrus anointed. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 1. A pagan king who did not know the God of Israel, receiving the same title that would be given to the Messiah. Consider the weight of this. The most powerful man in the world at that time, ruling an empire that extended from India to Ethiopia, with more than 44 million square kilometers of territory, serving as a direct instrument in the hands of God to fulfill a prophecy that Isaiah had recorded 150 years before Cyrus was even born. It was no coincidence. The book of Ezra records the decree of Cyrus authorizing the reconstruction. The book of Nehemiah narrates the return of the exiles under Persian protection. The book of Esther takes place entirely within the palace of the Persian king Ahasuerus or Xerxes, where a young Jewish woman becomes queen and saves her people from a planned genocide. Daniel, the prophet who interpreted dreams and visions about the future of nations, lived his last years in the province of Elam within the Persian Empire. He was there when he received the vision recorded in Daniel chapter 8, where he saw the ram with two horns, representing Media and Persia, being defeated by the swift goat, which represented the Greece of Alexander the Great. Observe what happens here. Persia is not a peripheral detail in the biblical narrative. It is a protagonist. It is the nation that God used to restore Israel after the captivity. It is the setting where some of the most dramatic stories of the scriptures unfolded. It is the territory where prophecies were given and fulfilled with surgical precision. And it is exactly why what is happening now is so disturbing for those who know these texts. Because the same land that sheltered Esther and Daniel, the same nation that God called an instrument of liberation, appears in chapters 38 and 39 of Ezekiel as part of a military coalition that will march against Israel in the last days. Ezekiel wrote approximately 2,600 years ago, and what he described seems to have come out of a live broadcast of the current situation. In chapter 38, verse 5, the prophet lists the nations that will join Gog, of the land of Magog, in an invasion against Israel. And there, among the names, is Persia, alongside Cush, which many scholars identify with the region of Sudan and Ethiopia, and Put, associated with Libya. The prophecy says that this coalition will come against Israel at a time when the Jewish people are back in their land, living in relative security, gathered from among the nations. Verse 8, a land that has recovered from the sword, whose people were gathered from many peoples. Does this description fit the Israel of today? Think carefully. Israel was restored as a nation on May 14, 1948, after almost 2,000 years of dispersion. Jews returned from more than 70 different countries. They built cities in the desert. They transformed swamps into agricultural lands. They developed one of the most advanced armies in the world. And yes, despite all the conflicts, Israel exists as a sovereign nation, with a population, government, armed forces, and defined borders. Exactly as Ezekiel described, a land that recovered from the sword. And now look at the other side of the equation. Modern Iran is governed by an Islamic theocratic regime that openly declares its desire to destroy Israel. It finances Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. It operates through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the Quds Force on multiple borders, and it maintains an increasingly close military alliance with Russia, which many biblical scholars identify as Magog, the nation to the far north mentioned by Ezekiel. The rapprochement between Moscow and Tehran in recent years, including cooperation in armaments, military technology, and joint exercises, fits precisely into the scenario described by the prophet. But there is a detail that most people ignore. Ezekiel does not say that this invasion will succeed. On the contrary, chapters 38 and 39 describe a supernatural intervention by God in favor of Israel. Earthquakes, hailstorms, fire, sulfur, confusion among the enemy soldiers themselves, who turn their swords against one another. The prophet says that God will do this so that the nations may know that He is the Lord. Ezekiel 39, verse 7. I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will no longer let my holy name be profaned. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Now one must be careful here, and have intellectual honesty. To state with absolute certainty that the current conflict is the direct and final fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 would be to go beyond what the text allows. Many serious scholars, both dispensationalists and amillennialists, diverge on the exact moment when this prophecy will be fulfilled. Some believe it will be during the first half of the Great Tribulation. Others place it before the rapture. There are those who interpret these chapters more symbolically, representing the continuous opposition of the world against the people of God throughout history. What no one can deny, regardless of the theological line, is that the elements described by Ezekiel are aligning in an impressive way with the current geopolitical scenario: the hostile Persia, the alliance with nations of the north, Israel restored in its land, and the direct conflict between these forces. And if you look more carefully, you realize it is not just Ezekiel. Daniel chapter 10 reveals something that goes beyond geopolitics and enters spiritual terrain. The prophet describes an invisible war. An angel sent by God was hindered for 21 days by the prince of the kingdom of Persia. a spiritual entity that dominated that territory. It was necessary for Michael, the archangel, to come to his aid so that the message could reach Daniel. 21 days of battle in the spiritual world. This suggests that behind the visible conflicts between nations, there are spiritual forces in operation. That the war in the Middle East is not just a dispute over oil, territory, or political power. There is a dimension that the news does not show and that geopolitical analysts cannot map. Have you ever wondered why the Middle East never has peace? Why this specific region of the planet, smaller than many Brazilian states, concentrates so many conflicts, so many wars, so much permanent tension? There is no other strip of land in the world that generates so much dispute for so long. And the biblical answer is clear, because there is the land that God promised to Abraham. There is Jerusalem, the city that God chose to place his name. There the temple was built, destroyed and rebuilt. There Jesus walked, taught, died and rose again. There he will return. The Middle East is not just a point on the map. It is the epicenter of the divine plan for humanity. And therefore, it is also the epicenter of spiritual opposition against that plan. Think about what happened in the last 5 weeks of this war. The United States and Israel launched joint attacks against Iran, starting on February 28, 2026. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in the bombings. The Revolutionary Guard lost high-ranking commanders. The head of intelligence of the Guardians of the Revolution is among the dozens dead. Petrochemical facilities linked to the South Pass gas field, the largest in the world, were hit by Israel. Railway bridges were destroyed. A synagogue in Tehran was damaged in one of the attacks, in a detail that carries a profound historical irony, considering that ancient Persia protected synagogues and Jewish communities for centuries. If you are following this and feel that there is something deeper behind every headline, behind every missile launched, behind every ultimatum given, it is because there is. Faith is not blind to facts. It is the lens that allows one to see what is behind them. And when someone dives into the scriptures with this awareness, they discover layers that most have never perceived. Many people know the story of Esther. Many people have heard of Cyrus. But few understand the deep connection between these narratives and what is happening now at this exact moment in the same lands where these biblical events occurred. It was thinking exactly of this that the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, arose. Because when the world trembles, when nations rise against nations, when ultimatums are given and civilizations are threatened, everything converges to a single point, the cross. The last words of Christ on the cross were not just a goodbye. They were a declaration of sovereignty over every conflict, every war, and every nation that would exist until the end of time. This material reveals the profound meaning that most never perceived behind each of these 7 words. To access it is simple. Take your cell phone, open the camera app, and point it at the square code appearing on the screen now. A secure link will appear automatically. Tap it, and you will go directly to the digital book page. If you prefer, the link is also in the description of this video. On the cell phone, tap the video title or the More option to open the description. On the computer or television, the link is just below the video. Many people are already deepening their faith through this reading, and by accessing it, you also help keep this channel active, producing biblical content like this. Access now and comment Amen down below. Returning to the conflict. There is an aspect that few analyses mention, but which is fundamental for those who want to understand the complete picture. Jeremiah, chapter 49, verses 34 to 39, contains a specific prophecy about Elam. Elam was a region that lay east of Babylon and west of Persia, in the territory that today corresponds to southwestern Iran. The prophecy says that God would break the bow of Elam, the main weapon of that people, that he would scatter the Elamites to the 4 winds, that he would bring evil upon them and send the sword against them. But, and here is the part that changes everything, verse 39 says that in the last days, God would restore the fortunes of Elam. This prophecy has layers. The first was fulfilled historically when Babylon conquered Elam in 596 before Christ. The second layer may be linked to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which scattered more than 1 million Iranians across the world. and the third layer, that of the last days, is still open. Some scholars, such as Pastor Jack Hibbs, suggest that what we are seeing now, the destruction of Iranian military power, the fall of regime leaders, the bombing of strategic infrastructure, may be the beginning of the fulfillment of this prophecy. The sword mentioned by Jeremiah and the promise of restoration in the last days may point to a spiritual transformation of the Iranian people. And here enters a fact that should make anyone stop and reflect. In recent years, Iran has experienced one of the fastest growths of Christianity in the world, despite the brutal persecution of the Islamic regime, which punishes conversions to Christianity with imprisonment and even death. The number of Iranian Christians has increased significantly. Downloads of Bibles and Christian materials in Farsi have grown exponentially. Underground churches multiply throughout the country. Missionary organizations estimate that there are between 500,000 and 1 million secret Christians in Iran today. In a country of 88 million inhabitants governed by a regime that defines itself as the guardian of Shia Islam, hundreds of thousands of people are silently embracing the Christian faith. Could this be part of the restoration that Jeremiah prophesied? The Bible records in Acts chapter 2 verse 9 that on the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles in Jerusalem, there were in the city Parthians, Medes, and Elamites. All these peoples came from the region that is now Iran. They were present at the birth of the church. They heard Peter preach. They saw the miracle of tongues. And now, 2,000 years later, the Spirit of God seems to be returning to that land with force. It is not just Iran that is changing. The entire board is in motion. Turkey, which in the Bible is associated with Togarma, another nation mentioned in the coalition of Ezekiel 38, has positioned itself increasingly against Israel in international forums. Russia, which many identify with Magog, maintains a military presence in Syria, a few kilometers from the Israeli border. Libya, associated with Put, lives in chronic instability. Sudan, linked to Kush, has gone through recent coups and civil wars. Each piece of the board described by Ezekiel is positioning itself, not all at once, not abruptly, but with the progressivity that Jesus described in Matthew 24, when he compared the signs of the end times to birth pains. They start spaced out, they intensify, and in the end the frequency is so high that they can no longer be ignored. When you look at this conflict and feel the weight of what is happening, when you realize that the same biblical lands are again at the center of world news, when you see nations rising against nations exactly as Jesus described, remember that there is a depth in the scriptures that goes far beyond what most imagine. Every word of Christ carries an eternal weight, especially the last ones he pronounced on the cross, in the heart of Jerusalem, the same city that is at the center of all this. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, opens these layers of meaning for you. To access, point your cell phone camera at the code on the screen or tap the link in the video description. By doing so, you also contribute to this channel continuing to bring content like this. Now look at the other side of the conflict. Israel. What does the Bible say about the fate of this nation in the midst of all this? Zechariah chapter 12 verses 2 and 3 contains one of the most cited prophecies about Jerusalem in recent times. It says that God will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples, that all the nations of the earth will gather against it, and that all who try to lift it will be cut to pieces. 2,500 years ago, a prophet described a city that would become the center of a global conflict involving all nations. Look around. The UN Security Council debates Israel almost every week. Resolutions are vetoed. Alliances form and dissolve. And Jerusalem remains there, immovable, exactly like a heavy stone that no one can displace. The current conflict has numbers that impress by their scale. More than 2,076 Iranians dead in 5 weeks. 4 Israelis killed by an Iranian ballistic missile in Haifa. Oil reached $117 a barrel before the ceasefire. The estimate from the United States Energy Information Administration is that Middle East oil production will not return to levels prior to the conflict until the end of 2026. The Strait of Hormuz, only 48 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, is the artery through which flows the energy that moves the world. Closing this passage is like blocking a vein in the heart of the global economy. And in the midst of all this, Pakistan emerged as a mediator, an Islamic country with nuclear weapons trying to prevent two powers from destroying each other. The Pakistani Prime Minister invited American and Iranian delegations for negotiations in Islamabad on April 10, 2026, a Friday, the same city where decades ago decisions were made that altered the balance of power in the Middle East. Will the negotiations work? No one knows. Iran presented a 10-point proposal, including the guarantee that it would not be attacked again, the end of Israeli bombings against Hezbollah in Lebanon, the suspension of sanctions, and the reconstruction of the country. In exchange, it would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but charging a fee of $2 million per ship. Trump said the proposal was significant but insufficient. Israel was not even mentioned as part of the agreement. Netanyahu continued bombing on his own. There is a pattern in the scriptures that repeats throughout all history. When the people of God face existential threats, when it seems that everything will end, God intervenes. Not always in the expected way, not always at the desired moment, but always. He intervened when the Egyptian army cornered the Hebrews at the Red Sea. He intervened when Sennacherib surrounded Jerusalem with 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, and an angel destroyed the entire army in a single night, as recorded in 2 Kings chapter 19. He intervened when Haman planned the extermination of all Jews in the Persian Empire, and Esther rose up. He intervened when Babylon destroyed the temple and took the people into captivity, but then raised Cyrus to restore everything. The question is not whether God will act. The question is how and when, and that is where interpretive humility becomes essential. Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 36, that no one knows the day or the hour, not the angels, not the Son in that context, only the Father. This does not mean we should ignore the signs. It means we should observe them with reverence, not with prophetic arrogance. It means we should study the scriptures with dedication, compare what is written with what is happening, but without ever decreeing that we know exactly God's schedule. What we can affirm with biblical certainty is the following. Israel exists because God promised it would exist. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. The covenant with Abraham was not revoked. Paul confirms this in Romans chapter 11. Israel will face opposition in the last days. Zechariah 12, Ezekiel 38, Matthew 24. Persia, current Iran, appears as part of this opposition. Ezekiel 38, verse 5. God will intervene in favor of Israel. Ezekiel 38, verses 18 to 23. And the final result will not be human military victory, but the manifestation of the glory of God before all nations. Ezekiel 39, verse 7. Now there is a dimension that many preachers avoid, but which needs to be said. War exacts a devastating human price. Of the more than 2,000 lives lost in Iran in 5 weeks, the vast majority are civilians. Families. People who did not ask for this war, who did not choose the regime that governs them. Children who do not understand why the ground shakes and the sky darkens with smoke. A university in Tehran was bombed. Residential buildings were destroyed. The internet was cut in much of the country, isolating millions of people from the rest of the world. Trains were cancelled in entire cities because Israel threatened to bomb railways. In Mashhad, the second largest city in Iran, with more than 3 million inhabitants, all train travel was suspended indefinitely. This cannot be ignored by those who read the Bible, because the same God who prophesied judgment upon nations also wept over Jerusalem. Jesus, in Luke 19, verses 41 to 44, saw the city and wept over it. He wept because he knew what would come: the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the dispersion of the people, the suffering of generations. God is not indifferent to human pain, and whoever uses biblical prophecies to celebrate the destruction of any nation is profoundly distorting the character of God revealed in the Scriptures. Prophecy is revelation, not entertainment. It is a call to vigilance, not to cheering for catastrophe. Observe the profound irony of this moment. The same Persia that protected the Jews, that financed the reconstruction of the temple, that sheltered Queen Esther and the prophet Daniel, is now bombed by Israel. And Israel, which was saved by Persia in the past, now attacks Iran to ensure its survival. Biblical history does not move in a straight line. It moves in spirals. The same nations reappear, the same territories return to the center, the same patterns repeat, but on increasingly larger scales, like birth pains. And now we reach the heart of all this, to the point where geopolitics, prophecy, and personal faith meet, when nations give ultimatums and civilizations are threatened, when the world order trembles and the powerful shout, when missiles cross the skies of the same lands where prophets walked. The most important question is not who will win this war. The most important question is, in the midst of all this, where is your faith? Because the scriptures show, with absolute clarity, that everything moves toward a conclusion. And the conclusion is not destruction, it is redemption. Jesus, the same who was born in Bethlehem, who preached in Galilee, who died in Jerusalem, and who rose again on the third day, will return. And when he returns, he will return to the same region that is in flames now. Zechariah chapter 14 says that the feet of the Lord will stand on the Mount of Olives, the same hill from which he ascended to heaven in Acts chapter 1. The fate of Israel and Iran will not be decided by human ultimatums. It will be decided by the return of the King, who has already paid the price for all nations on the cross. The Persia of Cyrus, which one day freed the Jews from captivity and was called the Anointed of the Lord in Isaiah 45, is the same territory that today launches missiles against Israel. The nation that rebuilt the Temple of Jerusalem now threatens to destroy it. This inversion is not a geopolitical accident. It is the movement that Ezekiel described when he said that Persia would march alongside Gog against the people of God in the last days. The prophetic board is not late. But here is what many people forget. Jesus did not say to panic when you see these things happening. He said exactly the opposite. In Luke 21, verse 28, the words are clear. When these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your head, because your redemption is near. It is not a time for fear. It is a time for awareness. It is a time to understand that every headline you read today was already written in the pages of a book that is thousands of years old. The conflict between nations will pass. The ultimatums will expire. The wars will have an end. But the word remains. And it says, with absolute clarity, that the God who wrote history before it happened is the same who holds the future in his hands. The question is not whether the prophecies will be fulfilled. The question is, will you be paying attention when it happens? If this content touched your heart, if you felt that there is something greater unfolding behind every news item that arrives from the Middle East, then this is the moment to deepen your understanding of the central message of the entire Bible. Because all prophecies, all wars, all kingdoms that rise and fall converge to a single moment, the last hours of Jesus in Jerusalem. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, reveals what was behind each phrase that Christ pronounced on the cross, not as a superficial summary, as a deep dive into the heart of God's plan for humanity. To access right now, take your cell phone and open the camera app. Point it at the square code on the screen. A secure link will appear automatically at the top of the screen. Tap it, and you will be directed to the digital book page. If you are on your cell phone and prefer the direct link, tap the video title or the More option to open the description, where the link is available. If you are on the computer or television, just look right below the video. By accessing the book, you also directly help keep this channel functioning and producing biblical content like this, which takes the word to millions of people. Access now, deepen your faith, and comment Amen down below so that more people find this video.